We've come to Buckingham Palace in highly unusual circumstances. Normally, we'd be discussing your work. The morning Andrew could no longer hide. Just after 7:12 a.m. on January 26, while most of Britain was still wrapped in the washed-out blue of a winter dawn, a single sentence from Buckingham Palace cut through the quiet like a blade. The Duke of York will provide a formal statement regarding his personal relationship with Sarah, Duchess of York. No context, no gentle phrasing, no diplomatic cushioning, only inevitability. In the press room at the palace, journalists froze, fingers hovering above keyboards as though they were waiting for someone to confirm that the message was not a mistake. But it was not. Within seconds, newsroom phones lit up, foreign bureaus scrambled for reaction, and royal correspondents stared at each other with a rare expression, disbelief. Because everyone understood exactly what this meant. Prince Andrew had not volunteered to speak. He had been forced. Across the country, reactions were just as swift. A barista opening a small cafe in Plymouth glanced at the breaking alert and whispered, he held out as long as he could. A taxi driver in Manchester turned up the radio as analysts insisted something catastrophic must have triggered the palace's decision. In Aberdeen, an older couple paused before their morning walk, murmuring that it felt like watching an unfinished chapter finally snap open. But the sharpest reaction came from across the Atlantic, where American networks remembered the scandal years more vividly than anyone in Britain wished they would. CNN replayed archive footage of Andrew's infamous interview. CBS called the announcement a reckoning long overdue. Anchors spoke with the gravity usually reserved for state crises, not royal disclosures, because the story was no longer about scandal alone. It was about a man who had run out of places to hide. Inside Buckingham Palace, tension seeped into the corridors like cold air. Staff moved briskly but quietly. The way people walked through a house where someone is grieving. For weeks, they had known this moment was coming, though none expected it to arrive with such blunt force. At precisely 7:20, Andrew entered his private study, escorted by two senior aides whose faces betrayed the weight of what was unfolding. His expression was stiff, not furious, not frightened, but hollow in the way a man looks when his last defense has been stripped away. He knew exactly why he was standing here. And he knew that the truth he was about to reveal would not only reshape the public's understanding of his relationship with Sarah Ferguson, it would expose a far more complicated story the monarchy had quietly tolerated for decades. The emotional dependence, the financial entanglements, the unspoken pact that survived scandal, divorce, exile, and humiliation. A pact that even insiders struggled to define. For years, Sarah had publicly maintained that she and Andrew were united by friendship, loyalty, and shared parenthood. It was the line she had repeated in interviews, memoirs, and fleeting moments of public appearances. But behind palace walls, their relationship had always been more intricate than the public narrative allowed. Bound not by romance but by need. Bound not by marriage but by survival. Bound not by choice but by circumstance, neither fully controlled. And now, with the monarchy facing renewed scrutiny and foreign investigators revisiting old files, that arrangement could no longer exist in shadow. Andrew stood at the window, watching the winter light spread across the palace courtyard. For a moment, he looked like the young naval officer he once was. The charming prince who had captivated crowds in the 1980s, long before scandal rewrote his life. But the illusion faded quickly. He was no longer a prince, no longer a duke in practice, no longer a man protected by the institution he once believed would never abandon him. A quiet knock sounded at the door. The private secretary stepped inside carrying the statement Andrew would be expected to read before the day ended. Andrew did not reach for it. He simply stared at it with the heavy, reluctant gaze of a man who had run out of corridors to retreat into. The secretary spoke gently. Existing conditions require clarity, sir. Silence is no longer an option. Andrew exhaled slowly. A tired, resigned breath. The kind of breath a man takes when he knows resistance has become humiliation, and truth has become the only path left, even if it destroys what remains of his dignity. In that moment the palace, the press, and the world outside had no idea just how much Andrew would reveal. No one knew how deeply intertwined his life with Sarah truly was, or how far back the roots of their private pact reached. But they were about to learn because the sunrise had come, and with it a reckoning decades in the making. The cracks that formed in silence. In the weeks leading up to Andrew's forced disclosure, the monarchy found itself drifting into a winter unease that no one wanted to acknowledge aloud. It was late November when the first subtle fracture appeared. Not in the press, not in Parliament, but within the palace's own rhythm. A rhythm that had survived coronations, crises, abdications, and decades of quiet reinvention. But this time, something was different. It began, as it often did, with whispers from advisors who had watched Andrew retreat further into himself with every passing month. He had become unpredictable in mood, sporadic in communication, and increasingly dependent on the lone figure who had remained at his side long after the rest of the royal world shut him out. Sarah Ferguson. By then, her own life had already begun to fray. She had been cut off from royal provisions. She had left Royal Lodge. Her financial safety net was dissolving. And yet, despite everything, she returned to Andrew's orbit again and again, drawn by a bond neither of them could fully articulate. Behind palace doors, this bond was beginning to alarm people. The first warning came from a senior financial advisor who noticed irregularities in Andrew's expenses. Not illegal, not improper, just unusual. Payments directed toward private arrangements involving Sarah, travel costs, property consultations, quiet transfers meant to secure temporary housing. When the advisor requested clarification, the reply came back curt and unhelpful family support. The second fracture appeared in a Westminster committee room, where a confidential conversation took place between parliamentary figures and senior palace aides. The topic was the monarchy's future transparency. The concern raised was subtle but unmistakable. Unresolved associations tied to Andrew and Sarah continued to cast a shadow over the crown. Pressure grew. Not public pressure, strategic pressure. By early December, the communications office began detecting a surge of foreign media interest, not in Andrew alone, but in Andrew and Sarah together. American outlets especially were reaffirming their story as a still ongoing relationship with unexamined financial and emotional implications. One analyst put it bluntly, the public does not understand what they are to each other. And what people do not understand they fill with suspicion. Inside Kensington Palace, William reviewed these reports with a quiet, simmering frustration. For him, the issue was not romance or scandal. It was a liability. The monarchy had spent years untangling itself from Andrew's legal and reputational wreckage. Any suggestion that Sarah remained bound to him in ways the palace could not explain threatened to reopen wounds that were still healing. And saw it too, though she viewed it through a colder lens. Her concern was structural. For decades, the monarchy had been built on the principle that personal lives must never compromise institutional clarity. But Andrew and Sarah's ongoing entanglement had become impossible to categorize. They were divorced yet inseparable. Separate households yet intertwined finances. No official partnership yet bound by a silent pact that defied every royal precedent. And warned Charles during a winter briefing. This situation will force your hand sooner than you think. He nodded quietly, but his eyes drifted downward, betraying the conflict inside him. Andrew was still his son. Sarah had been part of the family for almost 40 years. The thought of exposing their private bond to the world filled him with a dread he could not shake. But silence was becoming dangerous, and the third fracture made that danger impossible to ignore. Investigators working on the revived American inquiry into Epstein's past submitted a series of documents requesting clarification about Andrew's financial arrangements over the past decade. One line item mentioned Sarah by name. It was not incriminating. It was not explicit, but it was enough to trigger an alarm within the palace. If foreign investigators were noticing connections between Andrew and Sarah, the palace had to assume the press would follow. Within days, a confidential winter review was launched. Advisors gathered evidence. Communication staff prepared crisis drafts, and senior royals reluctantly but unanimously agreed that Andrew's silence could no longer be indulged. The cracks that had formed quietly over years were no longer cracks at all. They were warning signs, and the palace could ignore them no longer. The interrogation behind palace doors. The decision to confront Prince Andrew did not come suddenly. It was the result of weeks of internal turbulence, carefully catalogued unease, and a growing fear that the monarchy was once again drifting toward a scandal it could not contain. Yet, when the moment finally arrived, it unfolded in a room few outside the institution even know exists. A narrow chamber deep within Buckingham Palace, used only for matters requiring absolute discretion. Its walls were lined with portraits of monarchs who had survived wars, abdications, and constitutional crises. Now, it would host a different kind of reckoning. On the evening of December 9th, just after the palace staff had retired, Andrew was summoned. The message was phrased politely, but there was nothing optional about it. Senior aides escorted him through dim corridors, their steps echoing with the tension of what was about to unfold. Waiting inside were three figures whose presence made clear how serious this had become. Princess Anne, the Prince of Wales, the King's private secretary. Anne stood with her arms crossed, her expression sharpened into something colder than disapproval. William, seated at the far end of the table, wore the look of a man who had accepted responsibility he never wanted, but could no longer delay, and the private secretary held a folder so thick it might as well have been a verdict. Andrew stopped just inside the doorway. No one invited him to sit. For a long moment, the room remained silent except for the faint hum of the heating system battling the winter cold. Then the private secretary opened the folder. "We have received inquiries," he began. His tone measured regarding financial transfers, shared expenses, and personal arrangements involving the Duchess of York. These inquiries concern the period from 2014 to the present. Andrew stiffened. His voice when it finally emerged was clipped. "This is inappropriate." And cut in immediately. "No, it is overdue." Her tone was so unyielding that Andrew's protest died in his throat. William leaned forward. "You know the position we are in. Silence has become untenable. Misunderstanding is becoming suspicion. And suspicion inevitably becomes narrative." Andrew's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The secretary continued reading. "Foreign investigators have taken an interest in your long-term financial support of the Duchess. Internal reviews have noted repeat irregularities in your joint expenditures, and certain engagements between you and the Duchess, though private, appear to contradict public statements regarding the nature of your relationship." A flush crept up Andrew's neck. He gripped the back of the chair in front of him, knuckles widening. "This is a mischaracterization," he said. "We are supportive parents. We have always been." Princess Anne slammed the folder shut. "Stop." The word reverberated through the room. "You have said supportive parents for decades," she continued. "And yet the situation has become more entangled, more opaque, and more destabilizing than you have been willing to admit. The monarchy cannot be exposed to speculation over your private arrangements any longer." Andrew looked at her with disbelief. And had always been firm, but never cruel. Yet tonight, her resolve was absolute. William exhaled, then spoke with the diplomatic precision he inherited from both his parents. "This is not about emotion. This is not about personal history. This is about the survival of the institution." Andrew's voice cracked. "The institution abandoned me long ago." That was the moment, and stepped closer. Her expression softened only a fraction. "You catastrophize to avoid accountability. You always have. But this time, your choices are not yours alone. They are affecting the crown. And that cannot continue." The private secretary placed a second document on the table. Listed on it were every shared financial entry connected to Sarah Ferguson over the last 7 years. Andrew's face was drained of color. "How did you do?" "You were not discreet," the secretary replied. William's voice lowered. We have spoken with legal advisors, with communications teams, with financial auditors. The only path forward is transparency. You must disclose the nature of your relationship with Sarah fully, clearly, immediately. Andrew shook his head, his voice rising with a tremor the room had never heard from him. You are asking me to betray her. Anne's reply came swiftly. No, you did that the moment your silence endangered her. The room froze. Andrew closed his eyes as if absorbing a blow. William finally stood. This is your last chance to speak for yourself before others speak for you. For a long, suffocating moment, nothing happened. Then Andrew lowered his head. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, stripped of entitlement. B, what do you want to know? The interrogation began. They asked when the financial dependence began, when the emotional reliance became binding, what promises had been exchanged, what arrangements had survived divorce, what truths had been concealed for the sake of appearances. And Andrew answered, not all at once, not easily, not without hesitation, but for the first time in decades, he spoke without shielding himself behind dignity, denial, or deflection. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. The bond between him and Sarah was not a relic of their marriage. It was an ongoing pact, a shared life disguised as two separate ones. When the questioning ended, William closed the folder slowly. This cannot remain private, he said. You will speak publicly. The monarchy cannot carry this ambiguity into the new year. Andrew swallowed hard. The fight had left him. When? Tomorrow morning. And with that, the meeting ended. But the consequences had just begun. Sarah's breaking point and the unraveling of their pact. The night Andrew was interrogated inside Buckingham Palace, Sarah Ferguson was sitting alone in a narrow apartment suite overlooking the Thames, her suitcase half-packed on the bed beside her. She had not been at Royal Lodge for weeks. That home, the sanctuary she once shared with Andrew, even long after their marriage had dissolved, no longer belonged to her life. Her world had grown smaller, quieter, and unbearably fragile. But she could feel something shifting in the air. She felt it when her phone buzzed repeatedly with calls she did not answer. She felt it when Beatrice sent a brief message. Are you somewhere safe? She felt it in the hollow silence that followed. A silence that seemed to confirm what she had been dreading. Something inside the palace had changed. For months, Sarah had been collapsing under a pressure she tried desperately to hide. Financial uncertainty tightened around her like winter frost. Her charity partnerships thinned. Her public engagements quieted. Her reputation, once fragile but slowly rebuilding, began cracking again under the weight of revived stories she could not outrun. She was no longer the vibrant red-headed duchess of the late 1980s, laughing beneath the glare of photographers. She was a woman nearing the edges of institutional exile, clinging to a complicated relationship the monarchy could not understand. And that relationship had begun to unravel long before Andrew was ordered to speak. It began with Andrew retreating into himself, withdrawing behind silence, bitterness, and denial as his status shrank. He stopped returning her calls some days. On others, he asked her to come to the lodge only to shut down the moment she arrived. One evening in late October, she found him pacing the halls like a shadow of the men she had once known. Muttering about William, about advisors, about humiliation he felt tightening around him like a noose. She tried to calm him. He turned cold. She stepped back. He did not stop her. That was the first fracture. The second came when a palace advisor contacted her discreetly, explaining that certain financial reviews would soon require clarification. The tone was formal, distant, not hostile. Sarah hung up the phone with trembling hands. The final fracture, the one that hollowed her out, came from Andrew himself. It was a late evening in mid-November when she drove to Royal Lodge, hoping to sue him, to remind him they were still, in some strange way, a unit. She found him standing near the empty dining room table, staring at a stack of letters. His voice was flat when he spoke. You must distance yourself publicly, formally. You must say whatever is necessary. She laughed at first, assuming he was joking. He was not. When she realized what he meant, the pain rose so quickly she had to grip the back of a chair to steady herself. After everything, she whispered. His response was devastating in its simplicity. My survival depends on it. Survival, not loyalty, not partnership, not the decades they had weathered together. Survival. Sarah walked out of the house without another word. That was the night their pact cracked beyond repair. Now, weeks later, as dawn hovered over London, she felt another shift, a deep sinking certainty that Andrew had reached his breaking point. She could feel it like a physical presence in the room pressing in on her chest. At precisely 9:20 a.m., her phone rang again. This time, she answered. It was Beatrice. Her voice was tight. Mom, they questioned him last night. Sarah closed her eyes, her throat tightened. Questioned him about what? About you. The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. Sarah sat slowly on the edge of the bed. Her hand shook against the comforter. What did he say? She finally whispered. They don't know yet, but they want him to speak publicly. Soon, maybe today. The weight of those words settled over Sarah like snowfall. Soft at first, then unbearably heavy. She had always known their private bond would one day demand a cost, but she had prayed the reckoning would come gently, slowly, with mercy. Instead, it was coming like a winter storm. Across the city, journalists were already circling. Across the palace, advisors were preparing statements. Across the ocean, networks were lining up experts. And in a small apartment near the river, Sarah Ferguson felt the collapse of decades, not just of partnership but of identity. Because whatever Andrew was about to reveal would not simply expose him, it would expose her. All the years of unspoken reliance, all the financial entanglements she thought were invisible, all the emotional scaffolding built in quiet corners of royal life. Their entire intertwined existence was about to be dragged from shadow to spotlight. She pressed her palms to her eyes, willing herself to breathe. But Sarah already knew the truth. The monarchy had turned V. The nation was watching, and Andrew, under pressure he could no longer withstand, was about to say things that would change everything. The palace compels Andrew to speak. By the time the sun began lifting over the slate rooftops of London, Buckingham Palace had already reached a state of controlled crisis. Staff moved quickly but quietly, as if speed might shatter the fragile calm holding the building together. Senior advisors gathered in the cabinet room before 8 o'clock, each carrying thick folders, hurried notes, and the unmistakable awareness that this day would not end cleanly. Prince Andrew had been summoned again, but this time he was not being questioned. This time he was being instructed. The night before had opened cracks in the palace's patience, the interrogations, the evasions, the spiraling tone of Andrew's private remarks, the distressing inconsistencies in his account of his relationship with Sarah Ferguson. None of it could be contained much longer. The monarchy, already under winter strain from multiple crises, could not weather another wave of rumor without decisive action. This morning was not about gathering information. This morning was about control. Shortly after 8:15, Andrew entered the blue drawing room, flanked by 2 senior legal advisors and a private secretary assigned to monitor every word. He did not speak to them. His jaw was clenched, his expression stiff, and his hands remained folded behind his back in the posture of a man trying desperately to appear unshaken. He was anything but. Inside the room, William, Princess Anne, and Sir Edward Chapman were already seated. Queen Camilla was absent intentionally for the sake of optics. King Charles had chosen to remain in the adjoining study, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to preserve the neutrality of his role. When Andrew stepped inside, William lifted his gaze slowly. His voice when he spoke was controlled, but sharp enough to cut through the air. We are past the point of silence. Andrew's shoulders stiffened and leaned forward. Her tone was flatter, colder, forged in decades of royal discipline. Your situation has escalated beyond internal discretion. You know it. We know it. The public will know it soon enough. Andrew opened his mouth to respond, but the look William gave him, steady, unblinking, forced him to swallow his words. Sir Edward placed a file on the table. Inside it were excerpts from media outlets preparing to run new stories about Sarah Ferguson's living arrangements, her financial distress, her connection to Andrew's internal decisions, and worst of all, speculation about the true nature of their relationship over the past decade. These were not tabloids. These were mainstream investigative agencies, reserved, methodical, and increasingly relentless. William tapped the folder once. This is going out whether we intervene or not. What matters now is whether the palace speaks first or reacts after the damage is done. Andrew shifted, visibly unsettled. I cannot expose Sarah, he said quietly, almost pleading. Button cut sharply across him. You already have. The room fell silent. William's next words landed with devastating clarity. You must give a statement, Andrew, today. Not a denial, because that will not hold. Not silence, because that will be interpreted as guilt. You will state the truth. Not the truth you have hidden behind. Not the truth you have stretched, but the truth the monarchy can survive. Andrew's breath caught. Survive. That was the word. Not protected. Not defend. Survive. He could feel the walls closing in. The palace was not asking him. They were compelling him. And didn't soften her tone. This is not about sparing feelings. It is about preventing institutional collapse. Your entanglement with Sarah has been tolerated for years because it caused no harm. That is no longer the case. Andrew's voice cracked slightly. They will destroy her. And stared at him unblinking. No, you will destroy her if you refuse to speak. The truth of it landed with the weight of a stone dropped into deep water. Sarah had already become a symbol in the public eye of inconsistencies in the monarchy, of outdated privileges, of shadows tied to Andrew's downfall. If Andrew hid the truth now, the speculation would only grow sharper. But if he told the truth fully, cleanly, painfully, it might still cut Sarah, but at least the wound would be contained. William leaned back, folding his hands. Your statement will clarify the nature of your relationship over the last 10 years, your financial interdependence, the limits of her involvement in your affairs, and the reality of why she remained in your life. At that last line, Andrew's eyes flickered with something raw: anger, hurt, or perhaps fear. You want me to admit the arrangement, he murmured. We want you to end the speculation, William replied. If you do not, others will end it for you, and far less kindly. Andrew closed his eyes for a moment. He knew what this meant, admitting the arrangement, its emotional depth, its financial necessity, its entanglement that neither romance nor distance had ever resolved, would expose him to scrutiny. It would expose Sarah to judgment. It would confirm years of rumors that hovered just above the surface, whispered but unproven. But it would also end the guessing. Anne rose from her chair. You have until noon. After that, control leaves this building. It was not a threat. It was a deadline. Andrew did not speak. As he left the room, he moved as though the corridor had grown longer, heavier, colder. Because now the palace expected him to do what he feared most. Reveal the truth about Sarah, about himself, about the bond that had defined them long after the marriage had died. And the world was waiting. Andrew finally breaks and the truth comes out. When the palace clock struck 11:40, Andrew was still pacing inside the small consultation room adjoining the picture gallery. The walls around him felt too narrow for the weight he carried. His breathing was tight, uneven, as though each inhale scraped against the truth he had avoided for decades. A statement lay on the table beside him, drafted in careful legal language, but he had barely touched it because the truth he was being asked to reveal was not legal. It was personal, and it cut in every direction. At 11:50, Sir Edward re-entered the room. They are waiting. Andrew's throat tightened. William and the communications team were all assembled inside a larger briefing chamber, preparing to finalize his statement before noon. If he walked in now, the palace would help shape the narrative. If he didn't, the media stories scheduled for release that afternoon would define the narrative instead. Andrew closed his eyes. For a moment, he could almost hear Sarah's voice, not from their recent cold exchanges, but from summers at Royal Lodge, from the years when they remained a strange sort of unit long after divorce, from the quiet nights when she insisted he still had value, even when the institution said otherwise. She had stood by him. She had sheltered him. She had carried burdens meant for him, not her. But she had also suffered for it. And now she would suffer again. At 11:58, Andrew stepped into the briefing chamber. Every head turned. William's expression was unreadable. Anne's posture was rigid. A senior communications aide held a pen poised above the printed statement, as if ready to strike out entire paragraphs depending on Andrew's next words. Andrew spoke before anyone could begin. "I need to say it plainly." The room stilled. For the first time all morning, Andrew's voice did not waver. It was tiring, stripped but clear. "The truth is, my relationship with Sarah never ended the way the public believed." William did not react outwardly, but the aide beside him tightened their grip on the pen. Andrew continued, "We did not remain together romantically, but we remained bound emotionally, financially, logistically." He exhaled shakily. "For years, we were neither married nor separate, neither partners nor strangers. She stayed close because I asked her to, because I needed someone to anchor me when the rest of my world collapsed." A flicker of pain crossed his face, and she paid the price for that loyalty. And leaned forward. "You must clarify her involvement," she said quietly. "You must protect her where truth allows." Andrew nodded. "Sarah never participated in my decisions. She never advised me. She never benefited from anything improper. She simply stayed out of loyalty, out of history, out of a belief that I could be salvaged." His voice cracked at the last word. William exchanged a brief glance with, and an unspoken acknowledgement that for once Andrew was not hiding, he was surrendering. "There is more," Andrew murmured. No one moved. "I depended on her financially more than the public knows. Not unlawfully, but significantly. When my position deteriorated, she absorbed burdens she should not have carried. She protected me from realities I did not want to face. She stayed when a wiser person would have walked away." He lifted his gaze, eyes red, "and I let her take the weight." Silence swept over the room, heavy and electric. This was the truth the palace feared. This was the truth Sarah feared. This was the truth Andrew had never spoken aloud, not even to himself. William was the first to respond. "We can work with this," he said quietly. "If you frame it correctly, you protect her. You protect yourself. You protect what remains of the crown." Andrew's voice dropped to a whisper. "But it exposes us," and answered softly with unexpected compassion. "It exposes what was already collapsing." Sir Edward finally stepped forward. "We will refine your wording. You will record a statement this afternoon. It will be released before evening broadcasts." Andrew nodded once, slowly, reluctantly, but with acceptance. He had crossed the threshold. There was no retreat. Outside, cameras were already gathering near the gates. The air carried the sharp bite of late November, the kind that warned winter was about to settle fully over Windsor and London, and every corner of Andrew and Sarah's unraveling lives. By nightfall, the world would hear his confession, and absolutely nothing would ever be the same. In the cold shadow of his confession, Andrew stepped into a future stripped of illusion. While Sarah faced the fallout of a loyalty that had cost her everything. The monarchy tightened its walls. The public held its breath. And a decadescent long bond finally stood exposed in the unforgiving winter light of truth.